Yeah, so adaptation's gone right. I mean, what notes did you make? Because I'm curious about
Well,
your angle
I
about it.
that was what I was going to ask you. I made a list of ones that I thought for sure were just falling into that category of really good adaptations because they're all based off of books, plays, and comic books and things like that. But then, aside from that list, I put a note down here to talk about the difference between an adaptation versus a remake with a twist. So like that's where I was talking about like okay, so um where do you draw the line because like um I would say something like Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet is an adaptation and it just happens to be a modernization and a crazy weird movie with a crazy style to it, but I'd still call that an adaptation. But would you call The Lion King an adaptation of Hamlet, or is that just like taking the story of Hamlet and kind of doing it differently? You know, is The Magnificent Seven an adaptation, or is it just an American cowboy remake of the Seven Samurai? You know, I don't know. I don't really care if it's one or the other. I think they're both very interesting ways to talk about it. I just, it's a good question to think about. Where does the term adaptation stop? And
Yeah, I mean, I think my thought when I was thinking about writing that down is that it is mostly about like play book adaptations and not necessarily like reworking of the same story, especially if it's from another movie to another movie. But I mean, it is true that they're all variations of taking something from a prior state and
yeah,
making it new, whether it's the
well,
settings or
yeah. I
anything
mean,
else.
like The Lion King is technically Hamlet. That's from a play, right?
Yeah.
But I
Uh,
don't know.
Or
I don't know if that
technically,
counts or
it came originally from the Northman uh, folklore story.
not. um, or
uh,
10 things I hate about you is Taming of the Shrew, but that's a very different story by that point. It is a modernization and it's going for the same basic premise, but it's extremely different. So I don't know if that counts or not.
Yeah, it's funny because when you were talking, I thought of something and then I forgot. It's stupid,
Oh, okay.
but it's okay. I'll think about it if it's important. But also the main thing, and we might have touched about this, maybe not on the podcast, but generally this whole notion that oh, I remember what it was. Um, Children of Men. Yeah, because I recently listened to the audiobook of the book, and that's like an adaptation gone right. Like the Children of Men, the movie, and maybe we should do an episode about it at some point. Um, it's a tremendous movie,
So
uh,
good.
but it's a lot of it is just the way that it's done. Like the story itself, they keep the premise, which is very captivating. It's a very good premise, but it doesn't go nearly as deep as the book does with what it's about. Like that movie is really not about much, but it's still so successful at what it does do. It's very strange. So even though it completely veers off what the book is doing and doesn't even comes close to making the point that the book is making, it's still a tremendous success. And it's
Right.
better
That
than the book probably if you would. And that was another thing that I was going to discuss is like because there's this whole thing that books are always better than the movie because books are like a higher form of like a medium, blah blah
yeah.
blah. But really, ultimately, if you just look at which has more cultural importance, there's many movies that are better than the books that they're based on, or at least are more culturally
yeah.
Relevant.
significant,
Yeah.
It,
Well,
relevant.
that's a good point is because I would argue the latter, but the that brings up the question of I think everyone would agree that they're still adaptations, but is an adaptation judged solely on how well it tells the story of what it's adapting, or like how true it is to the story, or just how good of a movie it is. And if you're gonna, I think most people would agree it just matters how good of a movie it is. But if you're gonna judge it by how good of a movie it is, does it get points for being a good adaptation as well?
Yeah, I'm not sure because like The Shining is another example, a movie that is an all-time classic horror movie, but veered off what the book was, which is why uh, Stephen King wasn't crazy about it at the time,
Yeah.
um, and have since come around to it, sort of. But it's I don't know. I mean, but as far as cultural significance, I mean, Godfather is a way more significant movie than the book ever was, or you know, Goodfellas was based on a book. Nobody knows what the book is, but it's the Goodfellas everybody knows. So there's all these like movies that are better than the books that they are based on.
Better or just better known?
Better known, like more culturally
Okay. Yeah.
significant. Yeah, that's true. That is tough. Exactly. Maybe that's the main point, is that you can't really measure like the
Unless
quality
you've
of these
read them.
things. Yeah, for one thing, if you read them, but also it's different mediums. So it's very tough to
Yeah.
compare even a play, like to compare a production of Hamlet to Matt's favorite adaptation that keeps coming back to again and again, the Kenneth Branagh one. It's very tough. It's
Yeah.
it's just like it's to comparing like apples and oranges, really, because it's a different like feel, like being in a theater as opposed to watching a
Totally
movie.
different.
So
Yeah.
it's you can't really compare mediums, but cultural significance, that's but yeah, but then what you said, Jason, about movies that veer off the source material but actually do it a favor in some ways,
Yeah.
I feel like that's also interesting.
Uh, I mean, I think the phenomenon of the adaptation is one of those things that and I remember back in uh, like way back before I even met you guys at Montana State, we were actually talking about like some of the really early adaptations of like Uncle Tom's Cabin and everything, and how people were just expected to have read the book, and people just made this movie based on it, and it wasn't actually supposed to be a narrative uh, that you could actually watch. It was just supposed to be like, oh, I read the book, so I remember the scene from the book, and they put it on film and everything like that. And uh,
So
you
you're
know,
basically saying it was created to be extremely esoteric?
yeah,
Interesting.
basically. Uh, but uh, the most modern version of that I can think of, and this really grinded my gears when it came out, was the adaptation of Never Let Me Go.
Well, yeah, you've told me about that before.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Like, you read the novel, and the novel's 300 pages. I got through it in like 2 nights, and it's great. I mean, one of the best novels that I've read in 20 years. And they made the movie, and the funny thing is the movie was too faithful to the source material.
Hmm.
It made this odd effort to make this 300-page novel work in a 2-hour movie, and there are just certain things that work emotionally in the book, and then when you try to translate it into a 2-hour movie, it's just like, why the fuck is this even happening?
Hmm.
And this is coming from somebody who's been in love with Keira Knightley for like 20 years. Uh,
So what you're saying is that Never Let Me Go is an adaptation that doesn't work.
right, it does
Or
not.
no, I'm sorry, Gone Wrong.
Yeah,
Gone wrong.
Is that how we phrased it? Right? Gone right, gone
Gone
wrong.
right, gone wrong. Yeah.
it it did go wrong.
It gone wrong.
Gone
Yeah,
wrong.
and you can contrast that to certain adaptations, again, like The Shining, or There Will Be Blood, or The Godfather.
Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, The Shawshank Redemption. Thank you.
Yeah.
That we're just kind of like, okay, we're gonna get we're going to respect the spirit of what this was, but this is a movie.
Yep.
And it's a different medium.
Yep.
Marshall McLuhan was right. The medium is the message. Okay, we're going to embrace the medium. And
We're back to that. It's like from the early episodes.
yeah, yeah. So we're going to understand what we're going to understand and respect what the general thrust of the story is and what it's supposed to be and what the message is. But we're going to also embrace the medium and defenestrate a bunch of shit that we don't need.
Example being like in the book Shawshank Redemption, um, it's more realistic because uh, Andy Dufresne is in prison for so long. It talks about how he goes through the prison, I should say, goes through several different wardens in his time there because
Yeah,
people's career only lasts for so long, kind of thing. I think when he comes in, it's an older man anyway, and he only lasts for so long. And it's been many years since I read the book, but I think either one of them dies or one of them quits and retires, and then it's like he goes through at least 2 or 3, I think, or something like that. But when they're making the movie, they're like, no, there needs to be a face. Like, it's very important for a movie that there's a villainous face that is the person doing all this to him, the person who represents the prison, the warden, and so we're not going to switch him out for several times in the course of this movie. It's just one guy.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I think that's the point. That's the best point about this is like what you both said is understanding that it's a specific kind of medium that requires specific certain set of tools to have it be adapted to. Because otherwise, if you go too closely to certain things, like you can be pretty close. And for example, I haven't read Lord of the Rings, but I'm sure not everything's in there.
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
I
but
also have not read it, but I have friends and cousins and people who have read it, and they've told me many portions and chunks and even whole characters that are taken out of the story. But I have to assume that it's got to be one of the greatest adaptations of all time, right? I mean,
and it's fairly
so
faithful. Like
good.
I think
Yeah.
it's mostly faithful. I mean, another example for me is that Watchmen gets a bad rep for being very faithful to the book. That maybe that was a bad thing for
Except for
it,
the
but
ending, I think.
exactly. And the ending is it, and the ending I actually think is I understand why it is what it is in the comic book. It's supposed to be this absurdist, impossible type of out of left field thing that's almost completely meaningless. But in the movie, it's a lot more uh, appropriate to have the ending that they have because and I kind of forgot what it is now, but I just remember that
Instead
the
of like a space alien showing up or something like that, it's like a bomb goes off or something,
exactly
and they blame it on Mr. Manhattan or something like that.
yeah, so it all gets connected as opposed to something it's got more significance, which I feel like in a movie it would really frustrate moviegoers if there was no payoff that was connected because movies are supposed to be connected. Although, I mean, the Coen brothers have proved that you can make a point about randomness
yeah.
with things like, like A
Well,
Serious Man and No Country.
I think the brilliance of the end of Watchmen, and again, fight me on this. So okay. So the ending of the movie is that Matthew Good's character or whatever, uh, supposed to be the smartest guy the smartest like human being outside of Dr. Manhattan, concocts this whole thing where there are going to be a lot of attacks that are going to kill like millions of people around the world, and it's going to all get blamed on Dr. Manhattan. And there's this conflict at the end with Rorschach, who is just saying like, you know, uh, you're concocting this whole thing, and you're going to kill millions of people. The thing is, Dr. Manhattan's on the side of Matthew Good, saying like, look, yeah, we're going to kill like millions of people, but it's going to save billions. Just blame it on me. Screw it. And Rorschach is on the side of, no, we have to tell people the truth. This is wrong. I get the logic, but fuck you. we're not going to do this. And finally, it results in Dr. Manhattan killing Rorschach because, you know, Rorschach was just saying, like, no matter what, I am going to tell people the truth. And they just made this decision that, like, yeah, we're going to sacrifice millions in order to save billions. You contrast that with the graphic novel, and I do think that the movie made a better decision in a lot of ways. I know that Alan Moore would strangle me if he could, for me saying that. But I mean, that was a
It's okay, Matt. I'm sure Alan Moore would strangle Zack Snyder if he could too.
right.
Strangle anybody who would like say anything or adapt anything of his.
Yeah, right. He didn't like, yeah. Alan Moore didn't like V for Vendetta either, uh, but yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really powerful ending, just in the sense of, like, I mean, really, Watchmen. I mean, whether or not Zack Snyder is smart enough to understand the moral complexity of his own movie, like, he brought up a really valid point about, like, consequentialism versus deontological ethics and everything. And he did it in the context of what could have been a dumb superhero movie.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of examples of adaptations making changes like that, particularly to the ending. And it's weird because I often think that the message and the characters are the two most important things when it comes to making an adaptation correctly. Um, so you would think that the ending is kind of falls in line with that, but I think it doesn't always. Like, for example, three that I could think of while you were just talking about Watchmen, where the ending is changed. I guess it's not always super significant changes like what you were just talking about, but kind of like understanding the medium thing, like we were just saying, like Bridge on the River Kwai is like one of my favorite movies. And I've never read the book, but I hear that in the book it's even more impacting because of the fact that like the Alec Guinness character is so crazy that he literally does, stop the commandos from achieving their goal, and the bridge is there and the train goes by and it's like an utter failure, which really, hammers home the whole point and everything perfectly. But I think you get the point when his character is doing what he does and everything goes to shit and stuff like that. But as a cinematic movie, when you've spent the last third of the film setting up this mission, this covert mission, I mean, if you don't give the audience the explosion, like you've robbed them.
Yeah.
Like I really am totally on board with the filmmakers on this one. Like, I think it's absolutely the right decision to blow something up at the end of that movie.
It's because you need a visual climax. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And another going along with that, possibly one of the greatest adaptations that I've read, the book of and the movie of, or watched the movie and everything many times, and even had an entire section of a college class, devoted to analyzing it and everything, was Fight Club, which I really liked the book, but I have to say is one of the few novels that I read that were adapted into a movie where I have to say hands down the movie was actually better, um, because aside from numerous things that Fincher did to just make that movie so incredible, um, the end of the book has a very fascinating and clever ending where he's got the Project Mayhem guys, and they've set explosives all over the major credit card companies, just like they talked about in the movie and everything. But the ending um is different in the book because he wakes up in a hospital or something like that. He's been arrested, and they find out that I mean, it's a little vague, but basically that the good part of him, the good personality or something like that, was able to be in enough control that he told all of his guys to use a certain kind of explosive that he kind of knew was not going to work. It has to do with I think potassium nitrate versus ammonium nitrate or something like that in the explosives. But basically that he kind of sabotaged himself and none of the buildings blew up at the end. And at the end, he's in an insane asylum or something like that. And you have to kind of question whether it was all in his head or if it's all real. And then somebody calls him sir or something like that, like the way they would with the in the Project Mayhem thing. So you kind of leads you thinking at the end that like it definitely did all happen. It's just that he failed to blow everything up. So it's the world keeps on turning the way it does, And I think the ending of that movie where it's all going to hell and everything, all the buildings are blowing up and everything, is one of the best ways they could have possibly ended the movie.
Yeah.
And it
And then
seems like it's
the
a
only
similar thing, right? So it's a
very
visual
similar. Like in a
climax.
movie, you got it. Yeah. And then this one, I think, especially comic book fans, especially people who've read this, will probably completely disagree with me. I have had numerous discussions with people who completely disagree with me, but I have not read the comics that they based the movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World on, or versus the whatever it is, Scott Pilgrim movie. I have not read them, but I absolutely love that movie. And the huge change at the end that really pissed off all the fans of the comics was that at the end of the movie, or the end of the comics, I guess from what everyone has told me, he ends up with knives, not with Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character. And I think everything's pretty much the same, like it is at the end, where the whole climax is supposedly plays out the same as far as I know. But if you remember at the end of the movie, Knives shows up to help him, and there's kind of a thing at the end where like he's sticking around with Knives, and Mary Elizabeth Winstead is walking away, and Knives kind of tells him like, what are you doing, like go for it, go after her, kind of thing. And then he does, and Knives just walks away and lets him be with her, kind of thing. And I guess that doesn't happen or something in the comics, but to me, I think personally, this is just coming from someone who has not read the comics. So maybe I would feel differently if I read those first or at all. I don't know. But all I can say is that I think Edgar Wright did it right. And my reasoning for that is that, in essence, Scott Pilgrim is a coming of age film. I mean, Scott is acting, even though he's in college, he is acting like a child, for much of the first half of the movie. And, what better way to epitomize that than like, the fact that he's dating a high school girl, and she's probably underage. I assume she's like 17 or 16 or something like that. And he's probably 20 or something. And, he meets this girl, and in the first third of the movie, he's talking to his girlfriend, and she's so fascinated with him, and she's like basically like a groupie for his band, and she just falls all over every word that he says, and he says really stupid things about video games and she just finds it to be incredibly fascinating. And then he goes to a party and meets a more mature girl, and he tries to say the same stupid things to her, and she's completely uninterested, not because she's not an interesting person, not because she doesn't like him or she's not fascinating, but because the stuff he's saying is juvenile. Like it doesn't have any real relevance to anything, and outside of a niche, group of people who really like Pac-Man, so it's like it shows like she represents growing up, Ramona, Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character. That's the right way, I think, to end the story, is that he's going after a more age appropriate girl who he had a really strong connection with. And, I just think that that's the right way to end the story. But then again, I've heard many other people disagree with me.
Yeah. I don't want to digress too much, but I was just kind of thinking, like, I don't know if anybody else has read the original Ron Hansen novel of The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
I have not.
Uh, I mean, obviously adapted into a movie in 2007. One of the most same year of No Country for Old Men. That's the only reason why Roger Deakins didn't win the Oscar that year, was he split the vote.
Stolen.
Yeah. Both No Country and The Assassination of Jesse James came out in the same year, and they're both like masterpieces of cinematography. But the novel, by the way, the novel came out in 1983, so it had kind of been sitting there for a while before anybody actually made it into a movie. And the voiceover that was playing over Robert Ford's ultimate demise at the end of the movie is pretty much taken verbatim from the book. Uh, in fact, a lot of the voiceover in the movie is taken verbatim from the book. I mean, people complained about the movie being like 3 hours and not that easy to digest. But I mean, the book is about 500 pages, and they actually managed to deconstruct it enough to make it, as far as I can tell, a really good movie. Yeah, a long movie and a methodical movie, but it's a good movie. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of a faithful adaptation to the book. It did what it could to really embrace what the book was trying to do. And the biggest criticism that I can remember of the movie was when Richard Roper was doing at the movies, and Roger Ebert needed to take some time out for health reasons, and this guy came on and said, the only thing worse than a Terrence Malick movie is somebody trying to do Terrence Malick. And I don't know. I thought that was a completely wrong take. I thought that Andrew Dominic did something really faithful to the book, and he actually managed to translate it particularly well into the cinematic format. And that's my rant. So I'll stop now.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely not very Terrence Malick. I mean, it's slow, but I don't think it's got the same style. It's definitely meditative,
I
but yeah,
think
it's a different thing. And by
I
the way,
think
I'm not
it's
a huge fan of it, but it's I think it's a good movie, but it's definitely, it suffers from pacing pacing issue. It's a very good looking movie to watch, but still. Yeah, but I do wonder if it's almost good to wrap this up somewhere here, because I feel like what you brought up about the remakes and the adaptations from movies to movies, it's sort of like its own subject because
It is, yeah.
yeah, like it's crazy what happened where I mean, just one example, I guess, as a
Oh fuck!
it's what.
Sorry. No, it just occurred to me that I completely glossed over uh, a great adaptation, well, a great example of an adaptation done well, and that was Predestination. I mean, we've already talked about the movie.
Yeah.
Is that based on a book?
It's based off of a short story,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah, and we might have touched on this a bit in the past, like where because we talked about Blade Runner and Predestination, these movies that are based on short stories that lends itself very well as an adaptation because then it's
Shawshank
easier.
Redemption.
You're not compressing as opposed to you're expanding the story.
yeah, but
Um,
but the fun. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
no, I was just going to say what Gil was talking about. I agree that the it's a different thing. You know, the whole uh, like movies being remade with a very similar concept kind of thing.
Yeah, but more so like the biggest example for me, like the craziest example, is the fact that uh, that uh, Kurosawa,
Yeah,
you know, took American westerns and made them into samurai movies in Japan.
yeah,
And then Sergio Leone saw that and brought it back to the western. Only he did it in Italy, with like,
yeah,
everybody talking different languages, and and it's a whole other genre. Like he brought it, like the fact that like you take something to one place and then you bring it back to the place where it originated from. The plot, he took an actual plot, like the
yeah.
Yojimbo.
And
um
got sued for it, and
yeah,
yeah,
and
Well,
but
not
then
just
the
Yojimbo, but also Magnificent Seven, or I mean,
but
sorry, Seven Samurai.
Seven Samurai, and then to bring it back in a way that's the same genre but make it completely different. It just shows like how important it is, the person telling the story, because you can have
Yeah,
almost the same plot, the same thing, and it's but it is funny that Kurosawa saw in Western movies, samurai movies, and it's only obvious that Sergio Leone, I'm sure, who was a big fan of American movies, saw in a samurai movie a Western, but did it
yeah.
completely differently. So it's touches like that are interesting when that happens. That people
Um,
do that.
I don't want to go too deep into this, especially because I haven't never watched the whole film. But th- I wish I could remember how he said it because it was so fascinating. But a review that I saw on YouTube one time for a movie called Sukiyaki Django. Um, I really didn't like the movie, but not because I didn't like the movie itself so much. I only watched about 30 minutes of it. But there's this movie that was made a while back, and it's all Japanese actors, and they're all playing Japanese characters, but they're in like a western, and it's a strange story that really blends a lot of Japanese and American kind of themes and story, elements and stuff like that. Particularly westerns and samurai movies, kind of blended together. I loved the concept, and it's absolutely right up my alley. Something I should love, but something about it seemed so wrong because all the actors are speaking English, and I just felt like it definitely needed to be in Japanese, and it just drove me crazy watching it. So I just stopped watching it. I never finished the thing. But
And it wasn't dubbed?
no. It was just made in English, at least from what I could tell. Anyway, I was watching it on cable, I think, but maybe I'm wrong. I feel free to correct me if you ever find out about it. My whole problem was though that I'm pretty sure it was made to be in English, and
It was
it
like all
just
like a mind fuck.
it just felt wrong to me that it totally needed to be in Japanese. Everything else about it was fantastic from what I could tell, but it just bothered me, so I just turned it off. But what I was trying to get at is that a critic like was reviewing this movie, and they had this fascinating take on this whole thing about just about how America and Japan have had this fantastic exchange of culture for many decades, maybe even over a century now. But our cultural exchange has been really good with each other, and it's so interesting to see what you were just talking about, because he talks about how you can see Kurosawa being influenced by American films and American culture, making his movies, which then clearly spoke to Sergio Leone, and him taking those movies and kind of remaking them for as an American movie, but making them in Italy with American actors. And then in a way, so many of Kurosawa's films being remade a bunch of times in different ways here. And then how this movie, in a weird sort of way, was kind of taking those films and repackaging them into a Japanese film with Japanese characters in an American setting. And it's like such a back and forth thing that, in a weird sort of way, that movie like almost kind of represented the epitome of all this weird exchange in a beautiful way. Except I just couldn't watch it myself. I couldn't get into it because it felt like I was watching I don't know what it felt like. It just felt strange because I just thought it definitely needed to be in Japanese. So I don't know. That's just my weird thing on that.
And Magnificent Seven was it adapted, right, from Seven Samurai, right?
Absolutely. As
Yeah.
was, I mean, the Seven Samurai has been probably adapted 25, 30 times, probably. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
the Magnificent Seven
Bug's
and
Life.
Bug's Life for sure is a good one. The 13th Warrior. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah. But yeah, no, but it's interesting. That is a more clear exchange between that he was influenced by American movies, made it into a samurai movie, and then it bounced back. Like it only makes sense. But the Sergio Leone thing was just like a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's not too many examples of that.
No,
Uh,
not
I
in the back
mean,
and forth for sure.
I mean, this is another subject of conversation. We can think about it for next time. But like, yeah, it's like I wrote this down as like movies that are influenced by filmmakers, like basically movies that wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for certain filmmakers existing and making certain types of movies. Because we touched on with Jesse James, like the Terrence Malick like
Yeah.
thing. There's movies that owe so much to his style, just like there's movies that owe so much to the Scorsese style, or even somewhat the
Um,
Spielberg style. But
but we don't have to get into it because, like you said, we could always save it for another thing. But just throwing it out there, like you know, John Carpenter made Assault on Precinct 13, right? Assault on Precinct 13 got remade into a modern remake, which wasn't nearly as good, but it was interesting. Had Ethan Hawke and Lawrence Fishburne and a few other people in it. But then it also, what's interesting, I think, is that he kind of remade his own movie when he made Ghosts of Mars, and he just made a futuristic space, Martian version of his own movie that kind of had zombie things instead of criminals attacking them. And then another weird sort of similar one would be like um George Miller. He made the three Mad Max movies, and then early on in his career, and then way later in his career gets a chance to make a Mad Max movie again, doesn't make a sequel, instead kind of reboots the whole thing and makes a whole new franchise with that Mad Max Fury Road. But you watch Fury Road and you see that it he is taking so many ideas, characters, elements, and all these things from those three movies and putting them into that movie. And that movie would not exist without his previous ones that he did.
Yeah, so being influenced by yourself in a way is also like its own thing.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah, but that's the whole, like, art begets art type of thing. So
we could we don't have to talk about them, but I mean, I really feel like if we could even do it in another episode or something, but we barely even touched on all the classics that have been remade hundreds of times, like Sherlock Holmes, Robin Hood, Dracula films, the Burroughs stuff like Tarzan and that John Carter of Mars movie, which is horribly underrated. And then
there's definitely an infinite amount of movie of like source material that we could discuss, but it is a good point, because some of those were like Peter Pan and like some of the fairy tales have been remade so many times, so you could definitely discuss that for a while, like just which versions
like Shakespeare at that point. They've been adapted so many times.
Yeah, exactly. And what makes good versions better than others? And it seems like ultimately what we said is understanding the medium, understanding that sometimes you would have to change the ending to make it a cinematic ending, and you definitely need a visual climax, when possible, or an emotional one.
Yeah, we could do a deep dive into that sometime. But I mean, like, one thing that I love about that stuff, and this plays into Shakespeare, it plays into some of those classics like we just talked about, vampire movies, like specifically if it's a Dracula thing too. But I especially if I've read the original source material or if I've just seen a whole bunch of versions, I get a real kick out of watching adaptations when they're done right, because I like to point out stuff that you can compare in all of them, and talk to people about like who did what best. Even if like the movie wasn't as good as another adaptation, you could point out like in this Dracula movie, the Rehnquist character is like so much better than in this one and this one and this one, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and ultimately it's tough to nail all those things just right. I mean, those rare ones, but
totally.
But everything is just an attempt to tell a story in its own way. And yeah, before Matt joined us, I was talking about the Pinocchio thing, and the Del Toro Pinocchio. I don't know if you've seen it, Matt.
I have not.
Yeah, it's definitely Pinocchio is supposed to be a kid's tale, and even though some of those fairy tale, like the earlier ones, are supposed, they get very dark, but he goes dark. Like, it is not a kid's movie. It's like
Pan's Labyrinth stuff.
Pinocchio's got some, like, in all the adaptations, I mean, the nose, the turning into a donkey. There's a lot of stuff that's like really, it's not easy for kids to stomach, but also just visually where he goes there, and where the story goes, it's still the same plot points, but it's just very, very adult, essentially. Like, not, it's, yeah, I mean, a teenager could watch it, but definitely not a kid. So it's interesting. It's interesting the way you can take a story that's been done to death, but then breathe new life into it. And even though it's polarizing, it's like, oh, come on, that's a bit too much. But then you're like, but that's what he's doing. That's like his shtick. He wants to do his version, and it's got its strengths and weaknesses.
I don't remember the specific conversations we were having, but I definitely remember all three of us watching that that David Tennant Hamlet thing, you know? And it's like, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, when you see a scene and you're like, you've seen it 5 other times, but you're like, for the first time ever, you see Patrick Stewart play a character just totally different than, just the choices, doesn't matter if it's an acting choice, directing choice, storytelling choice, something they did different in the writing. I don't know, but like, I mean, while we're talking about Shakespeare, I love Joss Whedon's Much Ado About Nothing. You know, I mean, it's like so different and so great all at the same time, and it's not the only version I love. I love the Brana one too, but you know, it's just it's great seeing that stuff. You know,
Yeah, I mean, my favorite thing about the Joss Whedon Much Ado About Nothing is that he didn't write it.
I
I
don't I don't like
so,
you right now.
Oh, what did he say? Sorry,
Don't.
I missed that.
We're not going to repeat it. It's blasphemous.
I guess I'll
And Matt
listen to it when I
is
edit
just
the episode.
trying to get back at me for my equilibrium comments because Matt is trying to just piss me off. You had a fraction of the
I was
talent
gonna
that
say,
man had.
as far as
Yes.
like remakes, I was surprised to hear that they remade Akira this year.
Oh, did they?
There's the with Bill Nye, this movie called Living. And he's getting a lot of like buzz. Like they're saying it's like a great performance. I think he might be nominated for an Oscar for it. Like the movie is also well reviewed, but I don't think anybody says that it's nearly as good as Akira. But they're saying it's like a solid version of that story, and it's, I guess, smart that they chose like a British, setting, like a British actor and stuff, because like you feel like Japanese and English people both have this like, you know
Yeah.
quiet desperation about them. Like,
I'm you brought that up, and I don't know why. He's a great actor. I love him so much. I don't know if I've ever seen him do a performance I didn't like, but I don't know why my brain did this, but you're talking about Ikiru and you're like a remake. My brain is trying to picture it, and for some reason you're like, and it's a Bill Nye movie, and I'm like, the science guy.
oh,
And I
sorry.
don't know
Yeah.
why on earth my brain went there. I don't know. It makes no sense because the first thing that comes to my brain should definitely be the actor Bill Nye. I don't understand it, but that's
Yeah,
just where my brain went. I don't get it.
They do have the same name. That's kind of funny. It's just spelled
I think it's
different.
spelled different, but it's pronounced exactly the same. But I don't think anyone has ever been talking about movies and brought up Bill Nye and have had that reaction. Never once. I've always thought about the actor every time. He's so amazing. And for some
I think
reason,
it
when
might
you
be
said that,
it might be Bill Nighy. Like maybe
no,
it's like,
I don't
I'm
think
not
so.
saying
I
it
think
right.
it's just Nye.
It's
it
just
is
Nye.
pronounced Nye. It just
No.
looks like Nye or
It's
whatever.
got more letters than Bill Nye.
All I know is there's no excuse for it. I just, for some reason, that's what went through my head, and I was like, "What?" And then it just clicked, and I was like, "I'm dumb."
Yeah. Yeah. No, there is definitely a big subject of conversation that we've touched on in other episodes, like the whole adaptation thing. But yeah, you can almost break it up to like 3 parts, like the whole different.